2011, a film made for $1 million in Indonesian by a Welsh director in a Jakarta apartment block changed what action cinema thought it could be. It didn't have a star, it didn't have a marketing budget. It premiered to immediate praise at the Toronto International Film Festival. And within a year, every serious filmmaker working in action cinema had seen it. Within 3 years, you could trace its influence to the corridor fights in the MCU and to the hard-hitting DNA of the John Wick franchise. And at the center of it was a 31-year-old company driver. His name? Iko Uwais. This is 10-Point Fist, where we scored the legends of action cinema, one fighter at a time. 6 categories, 10 points each, 60 total. The question is always the same. Who actually deserves to be here? Iko Uwais was born in Jakarta in 1983. His grandfather, H. Ahmed Bunawar, was a Silat master and the founder of the Tiga Berantai school, a Betawi style that translates as 3 chains, referring to the 3 streams that make up the discipline. The tiger for power and base, the shoot for rapid open palm strikes, and the rubber for the elastic reflexive quality of the defense. Iko began training at 10 years old. By 2005, at the age of 22, he was the Indonesian national champion in the Silat demonstration category. In 2007, a Welsh filmmaker named Gareth Evans arrived at the Tiga Berantai school, filming a documentary about Pencak Silat. He watched Iko move, and then immediately asked him to quit his day job working as a driver for a telecoms company and become an actor. I think this part's important. You see, Iko wasn't a trained actor. He wasn't someone grinding auditions, nor someone that had built a profile in the Indonesian film industry. He was a company driver who had never acted in his life, discovered in a training hall by a novice Welsh documentary filmmaker, and within 4 years, this resulted in one of the most significant pieces of action cinema of the 21st century. Merantau is not a perfect film. The plot is simple. A young man undergoes a traditional coming-of-age journey, arrives in Jakarta, and ends up fighting human traffickers. As you do. The first half is slow, and it can test your patience. At the time, some critics called it a chore to sit through. They weren't entirely wrong, and that's exactly why it starts my list of Iko's 3 perfect films. That lack of action, and the slower, more pensive beginning forces Iko to do something most martial arts stars don't worry about until much later in their careers. It forces him to act. Merantau matters for 2 more reasons that have nothing to do with its plot. The first is that it introduced Pencak Silat to an international audience, one that had never seen the discipline performed at that level on screen. The second is that it showed what Iko could do with a camera pointed at him. The natural screen presence that Evans had spotted in the training hall translated into something legible, even to audiences who really didn't know what they were watching. It won the Best Film Award at Action Fest 2010 for a first film by a director and an actor who'd never made a martial arts feature between them. It was a genuine accomplishment. More importantly, it was the proof of concept that led to one of the most seminal action films of the generation. The Raid cost approximately $1 million to make. It grossed roughly 13 times that on release, but the box office numbers are the least interesting thing about it. What Gareth Evans and Iko Uwais built in that apartment block was a film that understood something action cinema had forgotten. That a fight sequence is not an interruption of the story. It is the story. Every confrontation in the Raid reveals character, it raises stakes, advances the narrative, not through dialogue, but through bodies, and more importantly, actions. I don't even know where to start. The corridor fight, the anxious pacing, the final 2-on-1 confrontation with Mad Dog played by Yaya Murian, who was one of Iko's real-life training partners. The Raid, in my humble online opinion, is one of the greatest pieces of action filmmaking ever made. The Raid premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival in September 2011. It arrived in North American theaters in March 2012 and earned some of the highest per-screen averages of any specialty release that year. It was cited within months as an influence by filmmakers on multiple continents, and a Hollywood remake was, of course, immediately put into development, and immediately fell into development hell. Some things just aren't meant to be remade.
You know, personally, I don't need to see The Raid remade.
Yeah.
Where The Raid was a siege film, lean, claustrophobic, and relentless, The Raid 2 is something closer to a crime epic. It's almost twice as long, it has 3 times as many characters, and it takes place over a much longer period of time. It is by any measure the more ambitious film. Also, there's no actual raid that takes place during its runtime. In the view of many action fans, it's the better one. There's the kitchen fight, the prison mud fight, the car chase. There's a villain known only as Hammer Girl, fighting with claw hammers in a subway carriage. Honestly, there's an almost gimmicky element at play, like an old-school martial arts movie, with a series of weirdly lethal villains.
You take that back!
And that means there are also a lot more ways it could have gone wrong. Iko carries the dramatic weight of the film across a much longer runtime than The Raid. He is present, credible, and sympathetic in ways the first film's stripped-back format didn't get to showcase as much. And while there are glimpses of it in the first film, The Raid 2 is the film that shows Iko as not just a physical instrument, that under the lethality lives a human. Gareth Evans has said that the story of Rama is, as far as he's concerned, complete. The Raid 3 had been discussed and effectively ruled out multiple times since 2014. However, in 2025, following the underperformance of his film Havoc, Evans seems to have warmed up to an idea of a potential sequel. I wonder why. The collaboration between Evans and Uwais, 3 films over 5 years, from Merantau to The Raid 2, is the defining creative relationship of Iko's career. But with success came new opportunities. Evans continued his filmography with the gothic horror Apostle, while Iko started getting calls from Hollywood. And this is where the story gets complicated. Hollywood had a picture of who Iko Uwais was. He was the guy from The Raid. He was fast, he was dangerous, he was the face of a new type of action cinema. But what Hollywood was less clear on was what to do with all of that. The Star Wars cameo in The Force Awakens is a prime example. Iko, Yahya Nurian, and Chechep Arif Rahman, 3 extremely gifted martial artists, are cast as generic criminal gang members in blink and you'll miss it roles. Come on, JJ. What was that? JJ Abrams reportedly asked Iko to choreograph a lightsaber fight for the film. That sequence was rejected for being too violent. And that really says most of what needs to be said. 2018's Mile 22 gave him something closer to a genuine role alongside Mark Wahlberg. The film failed commercially and critically. It was a muddled, poorly written thriller that did a disservice to everyone in it. It was the moment Hollywood had been pointing toward since 2012, and it produced nothing. Then, Snake Eyes in 2021, Expendables in 2023. Wait. Expendables? Expend for Bless?
I see you like to play with knives.
A Netflix series, Wu Assassins, which ran for 1 season and found a small but kinda dedicated audience. A trail of projects that failed to capitalize on his physicality, while forgetting completely that his physicality works because there's a human underneath it all. But there's a second part to this argument, and it requires a similar honesty. Iko himself has said that English has been his biggest challenge in Hollywood. Not the action work. Hollywood's action choreography was never going to challenge Iko, but the language. The ability to carry a scene in dialogue, to do press, to walk into a room and command it in a language that isn't natural to him. That's a bridge that takes more than fast hands and high kicks to build. He's not the only one that was in this situation, because learning a second language, especially as an adult, to the point of being good enough to act in it, is actually really, really hard. Jackie Chan didn't speak English well when he first arrived in Hollywood.
What?
On his second go-around, His solution was to make the language barrier irrelevant. His physical comedy didn't need subtitles, and Chris Tucker handled the verbal velocity, while Jackie handled everything else.
$50 million? And who you think you kidnapped, Chelsea Clinton?
Jet Li leaned in the opposite direction. He played silence as stoicism, accepting roles where minimal dialogue was a character choice rather than a limitation. And it worked, because the roles were written to accommodate it. Sammo Hung, however, made American television work on his own terms, as a rotund, unexpected, genuinely funny action lead. And it found an audience precisely because it didn't pretend he was something he wasn't.
Thank you.
What Iko needed was the equivalent of any one of those pivots. A collaborator who understood what he was, the way Gareth Evans understood what he could do. A role built around his limitations rather than in spite of them. A character for whom silence wasn't a workaround, but a choice. Instead, Hollywood handed him traditional supporting roles in films that needed him to be a conventional action star in a language he was still learning. The question isn't whether Iko could have broken through. It's whether anyone in Hollywood was paying attention enough to figure out how. So the statement this episode puts out, 3 perfect films, then nothing, is slightly unfair. It wasn't nothing. It was a great deal of activity that produced very close to nothing, which is, depending on how you look at it, worse than nothing. Let's move on to scoring. Fighting pedigree. Iko Uwais began training Pencak Silat at 10 years old, reached national champion by 22, and has spent his entire adult life performing and choreographing a discipline that demands precision, speed, and full body coordination simultaneously. His grandfather founded the school where he trained. The art is in his lineage as well as his body, and there is no performance of physicality here, no fitness background mistaken for martial arts depth. Within Pencak Silat, Iko is about as close to the absolute top of the discipline as any performer working in cinema. The half point withheld is for the relative insularity of competitive Silat internationally, not for any deficiency in his practice. 9.5. The lineage, the competitive record, and a lifetime's practice in one of the world's most underserved traditional martial arts. The raid changed what Western audiences thought action choreography could be. Not because it was faster or more violent than what became before, though it was both, but because it was clearer. Every strike lands with consequence. Every movement has some spatial logic behind it. The camera was placed where the action was readable, not just where it was flashy, and the result was something that felt genuinely different from anything that had preceded it. Iko choreographed those sequences as much as he performed them. He's not simply a martial artist doing what a choreographer designed. He's a martial artist who understands cinema well enough to design his own physical language for the screen. That's a rarer skill than you'd think, and it's at the heart of everything that makes his best work so exceptional. For screen presence and choreography, 8.5.
Now, this move here, we actually, Larnell Stovell, of course. We did Undisputed 3 after watching this movie, and we completely ripped off that move.
Oh, really?
We stole it.
Oh, nice, man.
In Merantau, he is naive and earnest in ways that serve the coming-of-age story cleanly. In The Raid, he carries the film almost entirely through physical storytelling. The dialogue is minimal. The emotional weight is carried in his body rather than his voice. In The Raid 2, given a more demanding dramatic brief, he delivers something quieter and more melancholy. A man running out of options, performing loyalty to an institution that has put him in an impossible position. It's a genuinely affecting performance, bolstered by a director who understood how to put him in physical situations that made emotional sense. He even showed a little range by playing the antagonist in 2018's The Night Comes For Us. His English language work, however, tells a different story. In Hollywood productions, the fluency gap is audible. The ease that comes from operating in your own language, the ability to play with rhythm and subtext and timing and dialogue, simply isn't there. It's not a complete failure of ability, but it is a constraint that his career in Hollywood never really found a way around. The score reflects both halves of that picture. For acting range, 6.5. At this point, his English language work forms the bulk of his total filmography, and that prohibits a higher score. Let's move on to his filmography. He has The Raid, one of the most unambiguous canonical entry points in all of action cinema. That automatically pushes him ahead of many of his peers. He also has The Raid 2, which is the rare sequel that expands on everything the original built without simply repeating it. And on a more personal note, I feel like Merantau gets a bit of a bad rep unfairly. Given that most people discovered Iko through the Raid films, watching Merantau afterwards can feel like a deceleration of sorts. I remember a slightly eccentric Silat teacher showing me Merantau on his laptop while we sat outside of a fried chicken restaurant towards the end of 2009. It was a great experience. I borrowed the film from him and watched it several times at home. It's good, it's just not The Raid. The Night Comes for Us in 2018 is visceral and technically impressive, albeit something that leans into a gore gimmick a little too much. Headshot in 2016 is solid, if somewhat unmemorable. What drags the score below where the top of the Indonesian trilogy would otherwise place it is the body of work around those films. I'm going with 7.5 for Iko's filmography. The Raid movies are iconic. His full filmography is complicated. Next up, legacy and influence. The Raid is widely credited as a significant turning point in action cinema. It's a film that demonstrated the effectiveness of an emphasis on choreographic clarity over rapid editing, something the 2000s had become way too comfortable with. Its influence on movies like John Wick is frequently noted, but I think its influence in general is underplayed at times. Its fingerprints are all over a decade of action filmmaking. Now, to be fair, Iko isn't solely what makes the film work. Gareth Evans directed it, Yaya and Ruhian co-choreographed, but Iko Uwais is the physical argument the movie makes. He's the body the camera follows. He's the face that brought Pencak Silat to, honestly, the widest audience it's ever had. For legacy and influence, 8. When it comes to star power, Iko has something that translates across the language barrier. A quiet, genuine quality that reads on screen whether he's speaking or not. The physicality is there, but there's also a softness. Watch his training footage or his interviews, and there's a warmth, a lack of pretension. It's genuinely endearing. What he doesn't have, and what this score has to account for, is the broader cultural magnetism that the highest scores on this index require. He isn't a figure whose profile extends beyond action cinema. He's not crossed over in a way that would make his name recognizable to someone who doesn't already care about martial arts films. The language barrier is part of that. The nature of Hollywood is another part of it. But the score reflects where things stand, and it is what it is. 7 out of 10. Fighting pedigree, 9.5. Screen presence, 8.5. Acting range, 6.5. Filmography, 7.5. Legacy, 8. Star power, 7. 47 out of 60, 78.3%. A score that is in one sense entirely straightforward, 3 of the best action films of the last 20 years, and a legacy cemented in the history of the genre. What it's also honest about is the silence after those 3 films. An entire decade of misuse, misdirection, and wasted potential following what might have been the greatest run any martial arts actor has had since Jackie Chan. The question this episode has been asking, without quite stating it, is, can you undo your legacy? Or do legendary productions keep you at the top of the conversation regardless of what comes after? And the answer I keep coming back to is, it depends on what you think legacy is for. If legacy is the sum of what you produced at your best, then Iko Uwais' legacy is exceptional and beyond dispute. The Raid exists. The Raid 2 exists. No amount of subsequent disappointment can reach back and unmake them. But if legacy is an ongoing conversation, a living influence, a continued presence in the rooms where action cinema is being shaped, then the picture is more complicated. The years since 2014 have too often been years of Iko being the best thing in films that really didn't deserve him. And a decade of that, it changes how a name lands, even for people who know exactly who he is. I'm keeping my eye on Uwais Pictures, the production company Iko announced in 2025. His directorial debut, Timor, released in Indonesia in December 2025, though the few reviews I've read so far have been a little mixed. I'm keeping my fingers crossed though. 78.3% is more than a respectable score, but it does feel lower than it should be. Iko Uwais takes the top of the 10-point fist index, comfortably displacing Video Chamwa. The argument for that gap is in the scoring. The main argument against it is that thanks to a somewhat stronger command of English and maybe a more traditional action hero look, Vidyut's ceiling might be higher. We'll see how that plays out.
Kan gue bilang, gue baru aja mulai.
Thank you very much for watching. Is 78.3% the right number? Is the legacy score too generous for a man whose Hollywood career produced so little? Or is the filmography score too conservative for the man who has The Raid? Comment below. Subscribe if you want to be here as the index keeps growing. And if you know someone who only saw Iko Uwais in The Force Awakens, send them this video. They have some catching up to do.